September 18th, 1945. 2:14 p.m. A processing center outside Dover, England. Oberhelferen. Margaret Schaefer can feel her heart hammering against her ribs as the transport truck lurches to a stop. Through gaps in the canvas she sees shapes moving. British soldiers. Her hands are shaking. Not from cold, the September afternoon is mild, but from 4 years of propaganda that promised this moment would be her last. The canvas flap pulls back. Sunlight floods in, golden and warm. Out, please. Slowly now. The voice is male, British accent. But the tone, that's what catches Margaret off guard. Not harsh, not threatening. Just procedural, almost polite. She climbs down with 19 other women. Wehrmacht auxiliaries, all of them. Signals operators, administrative staff, communications specialists captured in the final chaotic weeks of the war. Each one wearing the same expression, braced for impact. The blow doesn't come. Instead, a British officer approaches. He's perhaps 30, tall, clean uniform despite the dust of the road. Dark hair, strong features, and this is the detail that makes Margaret's carefully constructed defenses waver. Kind eyes. Actually kind. The propaganda never mentioned that possibility. "Right then," he says in surprisingly good German. "I'm Captain Ashford. You'll be processed here, then assigned to camp housing. Medical examination first. Any injuries need immediate attention?" One of the women, Hilda, former cipher clerk from Hamburg, raises her hand hesitantly. "My ankle. I twisted it during the surrender." Captain Ashford's expression shifts to concern. Actual concern. He calls over a medical orderly. "Get her to the infirmary first. The rest of you follow Corporal Davies." Margaret watches him help Hilda toward a waiting vehicle, his hand steadying her elbow with the kind of casual courtesy you'd show any injured person. Not a prisoner, not the enemy, just someone who needed help. This isn't what they promised. This isn't what 4 years of propaganda prepared her for. If you want to hear more untold stories from World War II that challenge everything you thought you knew, stories where humanity survived even in captivity, hit that subscribe button now. These histories matter. The women who arrived in Britain between September and December 1945 came from different places. Auxiliary Corps, signals units, medical stations across occupied Europe. Most had been captured as the Reich collapsed, some in France, some in Holland, a handful in the chaos of northern Germany itself. They arrived expecting brutality. That's what propaganda had promised. The Allies, they'd been told, showed no mercy to German women. You would be worked to death in factories, starved, abused, discarded. The Allied soldier in particular was painted as a savage, crude, undisciplined, barely civilized, a creature motivated only by revenge. And after what Germany had done, the women thought, who could blame them? The processing takes hours. Name, rank, unit, assignment, medical examination, delousing, showers. The shower room is the first real shock. Margaret stands under the spray, hot water, actually hot, and feels something inside her crack open. It's been months since she's felt truly clean. Months since she's been warm without shivering. The soap smells generic, industrial, but it lathers. It works. And there's enough of it that she doesn't have to ration each precious sliver. Around her, other women sob quietly, the sound half hidden by running water. They're not crying from fear. They're crying from relief. Afterward, they're issued clean clothes. Gray cotton dresses, practical and plain. There are undergarments, socks, shoes that actually fit. The barracks they're led to are Spartan but clean. Rows of iron beds, each with a thin mattress, a wool blanket, a pillow. no straw, no cold stone floors, no rats. A young guard, barely 20, thin-faced and nervous, shows them where the latrines are, where the mess hall is, where work assignments will be posted tomorrow. His German is terrible, heavily accented, but he tries. "Any questions?" he asks. No one speaks. They're still processing, still trying to reconcile propaganda with reality. He nods awkwardly and leaves. The door doesn't lock behind him. That evening, the first meal is served. Boiled potatoes, cabbage, a thin slice of corned beef, bread, real bread, not sawdust substitutes, tea with milk. It's not a feast. It's not luxurious. But it's more food than most of them have seen in weeks. Margaret eats slowly, each bite deliberate. Across the table, a woman named Elsa stares at her plate like she doesn't trust it. "Why are they doing this?" Elsa whispers. No one answers, because none of them know. The work begins 3 days later. Margaret is assigned to a laundry detail. 8 women overseen by a British sergeant named Matthews. Matthews is middle-aged, stocky, with graying hair and a Yorkshire accent so thick the translator struggles. He shows them the machinery, industrial washers, mangles, drying lines strung across a cavernous room that smells of lye and steam. 12-hour shifts, he says through the translator. 1 break for lunch. You work steady, we'll get along fine. The work is hard, repetitive, but it's honest work. And Matthews doesn't shout. When one of the women, Greta, a former signals operator, struggles with the mangle, Matthews steps in and adjusts the settings without a word of reprimand. Just shows her the correct technique and moves on. At lunch, they're given soup, bread, and tea. The same rations as the guards. After 2 weeks, the women receive their first pay. Camp currency. Printed notes they can spend at the commissary. The commissary is overwhelming. Soap, toothpaste, combs, thread and needles, chocolate bars stacked in neat rows behind the counter. Margaret buys a bar of soap and a small hand mirror. She handles them like sacred objects. That night she looks at herself properly for the first time in months. The face staring back is thinner than she remembers, older, but clean. And the eyes, her eyes, are no longer dead with exhaustion and fear. In November, something shifts. The guards have become familiar. Not friends exactly, there's still that fundamental divide of captor and prisoner, but familiar. You learn their names, their routines, which ones are kind and which ones are merely professional. Corporal Davies, who oversees the laundry, brings his lunch to eat near the work area sometimes. He sits on an overturned crate, reading letters from home, and the women work around him. One afternoon, Greta asks him, through the translator, about the photograph he keeps looking at. Davies hesitates, then shows them. His wife, 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 6. "They're in Liverpool," he says. "Haven't seen them in 2 years." The women are quiet. Because what do you say? That you're sorry? That you hope he gets home soon? That seems absurd coming from German prisoners. But Elsa says it anyway. "I hope you see them soon." Davies looks surprised, then nods. "Yeah, me too." It's a small moment, barely worth mentioning, but it matters because it's the first time one of them has acknowledged the guards as human beings with families and lives beyond this camp. The first time they've extended the same courtesy the British have been extending to them since they arrived. In December, Margaret's work detail is reassigned. She's sent to a farm in Sussex, rolling green hills, hedgerows still thick with winter brambles. The farm belongs to a couple named the Harrisons, a man in his 60s and his wife, both weathered from decades of farm work. Harrison doesn't speak to her for the first 3 days, just points at the rows of winter vegetables to be harvested, the equipment she'll use, the hours she's expected to work. She works in silence, hauling baskets, scraping mud from turnips and potatoes. Her hands ache, despite the gloves. On the fourth day, it rains. Harrison gestures her into the barn, where he's repairing a plow. "You know farming?" he asks in clipped English. Margaret shakes her head. She doesn't speak English well, but she understands basic questions. "Thought not. City girl." Then he returns to his work. After a long silence, he says, "My nephew died in France." Normandy, June 44. Margaret freezes, her hand still on the tool she's holding. Harrison doesn't look up. "Not your fault, I reckon. Just how things went." He hands her a wrench. "Hold this steady while I tighten the bolt." By January, Mrs. Harrison invites her inside for tea during the morning break. The kitchen is warm, smelling of bread and coal smoke. Mrs. Harrison pours from a chipped pot and offers biscuits. Hard, bland things, but made with care. They don't talk much. Mrs. Harrison's English is simple, and Margaret's understanding is limited. But the gesture says everything. One afternoon in February, while Margaret is working in the barn, a car pulls up. A British officer steps out. Young, perhaps 25, clean uniform, the kind of bearing that suggests education and good family. He's there to inspect the farm labor program, to ensure prisoners are being treated according to regulations. He speaks to Harrison for a few minutes, then approaches Margaret. "Everything all right here?" he asks in perfect German. "You're being treated fairly? Fed adequately? No complaints?" Margaret hesitates. Because the honest answer, that she's being treated better than she ever expected, better than the propaganda promised, better than she perhaps deserves, seems dangerous somehow. Like acknowledging it might make it stop. "Yes," she says finally, "everything is fair." The officer studies her. He has intelligent eyes, the kind that see past rehearsed answers. "Good," he says. Then more quietly, "War's over. No point in cruelty now." He leaves, and Margaret stands there in the barn, processing those words. No point in cruelty now. As if cruelty ever had a point. As if brutality was something you chose or didn't choose based on strategic value, rather than moral character. But here's what strikes her. The British could have been cruel. They had the power. They had the justification. God knows Germany had given them reasons enough. But they chose restraint instead. If this story is opening your eyes to the complexities of war and captivity, to the humanity that sometimes survived even in the darkest times, please subscribe. There are so many more stories like this that need to be told. Spring 1946 brings changes. Restrictions begin to loosen. Some women are permitted to leave the camp on supervised outings, church services in the local village, walks through the countryside. Margaret, now trusted, is allowed to travel to the Harrison farm without a guard. She cycles there on a borrowed bicycle, the wind in her hair, the road empty and quiet. It feels like freedom, even though technically it isn't. One Sunday, Mrs. Harrison asks her to stay for dinner. Roast chicken, a rare luxury, with carrots and potatoes. They eat together at the kitchen table. Mr. Harrison says grace. Simple words, thanking God for the food and asking blessings on all present, including Margaret. For the first time in years, she feels like a human being, not a prisoner, not the enemy, just a person sharing a meal with other people. That night, back at the camp, she writes in the small journal she's been keeping. If the propaganda lied about this, what else was a lie? The question is dangerous, treasonous even. But she can't unsee what she's seen. The British aren't savages. They're people, tired, disciplined, decent people, who could have chosen cruelty and chose restraint instead. And if that's true, if the enemy isn't the monster she was told, then what does that make the cause she served? She doesn't write the answer. She doesn't need to. But there's something else she doesn't write, something she barely admits to herself. Corporal Davies, the one who supervises the laundry, who showed them pictures of his children, who sometimes brings extra tea when the work is particularly hard, has kind eyes, genuinely kind. The kind that crinkle at the corners when he smiles. She's noticed. Of course she's noticed. It would be impossible not to notice. But acknowledging it, even to herself, feels like betrayal. Of what? Of Germany? Of her position as prisoner? Of the propaganda that insisted British soldiers were brutal savages incapable of kindness? The other women have noticed too. Elsa makes a joke one evening about the handsome sergeant, and several women laugh in a way that suggests they know exactly who she means. It's the uniforms, Greta says, properly tailored. Not like the Wehrmacht in the final months, everyone swimming in clothes 3 sizes too large because supplies ran out. It's not the uniforms, another woman, Frida, says quietly. It's that they're decent. You can see it. The way they carry themselves. The way they treat us. Someone else adds, the propaganda said they'd be monsters. Instead, they're... She trails off, searching for words. They're just men. Good men, mostly. Better than they needed to be. Margaret says nothing, but she thinks about Captain Ashford helping Hilda with her injured ankle, about Matthews adjusting the mangle settings without reprimand, about the young officer asking if she was being treated fairly, about Corporal Davies and his kind eyes, and she realizes something that makes her chest tighten. She's developed a crush, an actual, undeniable crush on her captor. It's absurd, inappropriate, probably some kind of psychological phenomenon that has a clinical name, attraction to authority figures, or gratitude mistaken for affection, or Stockholm Syndrome applied to prisoner of war situations. But it's real, and she's not the only one feeling it. One evening, Elsa admits quietly, there's a guard on the night shift. Patterson. He always tips his cap when he passes. Such a small thing, but it makes me feel seen, like a person. Greta nods. The medical officer, Captain Ellis. He examined my ankle last week, and he was so gentle, so professional. And all I could think was how handsome he looked in that moment. How kind his hands were. Frida laughs, but it's not unkind. We're all mad, that's what this is. 4 years of propaganda telling us British soldiers are monsters. And instead, we arrive to find they're whatever the opposite of monsters is. Human, Margaret says quietly. They're human. That's the opposite of monsters. The months pass. Summer arrives. The farm work intensifies. Haying season, long days in the fields. Margaret works alongside 2 British farmhands now, young men who were too young for the war or who were invalided out of service. One of them, Robert, maybe 19, tries to teach her English during breaks. He's patient about her mistakes, makes her repeat words until the pronunciation is right. Sometimes their fingers brush when he's pointing to something, teaching her the English name. She tells herself it doesn't mean anything. It's just language instruction, just practicality. Learning English will help her if she stays in Britain, or at least make the remaining months of captivity easier. But she notices how he smiles when she gets a word right, how he finds reasons to work near her in the fields, how Mrs. Harrison watches them with an expression that might be knowing or might be concerned. Nothing happens. Nothing could happen. She's a prisoner, he's British. There are rules and regulations and the fundamental divide of recent enemies. but the possibility hangs in the air like summer heat, unspoken, undeniable. In August, there's a dance. The camp commandant permits it, a social evening properly supervised, guards and prisoners both invited. Music from a gramophone, refreshments, the kind of normal social activity that seems impossible given the circumstances. Margaret almost doesn't go. It feels wrong somehow, dangerous, like crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. But Elsa insists, we're allowed. It's sanctioned. And honestly, I'm so tired of being frightened all the time, of treating every kindness like a trap. Just for one evening, I want to feel normal. So Margaret goes. The mess hall is transformed. Someone's hung decorations. Nothing fancy, just paper streamers and a few lanterns. The gramophone plays Glenn Miller. Moonlight Serenade. In the mood. Music that was technically enemy music during the war, but sounds achingly beautiful now. Corporal Davies is there, out of uniform, civilian clothes, a clean shirt, and pressed trousers. He looks different, younger, less like a supervisor and more like just a man at a dance. He asks her to dance. In careful, heavily accented German, May I have this dance? Margaret's heart does something complicated in her chest. I don't know how to dance to this music. Neither do I properly. We'll figure it out. They dance, badly, stepping on each other's feet, laughing at the awkwardness. And for 3 minutes and 42 seconds, the length of Moonlight Serenade, Margaret isn't a prisoner and Davies isn't a guard. They're just two people dancing to pretty music. When the song ends, Davies steps back, tips his head politely. Thank you, miss, and walks away. Margaret stands there, her hands still tingling from where he'd held them, and thinks, this is dangerous. This feeling, this hope, this impossible, inappropriate attraction to a man who's supposed to be my captor. But she can't make it stop. Repatriation begins in late 1946. Women are processed in groups, sent back to Germany in waves, back to the ruins of Berlin and Hamburg and Munich, back to a country that barely exists anymore, carved into occupation zones, struggling to feed its people. Some women choose to stay, marry British soldiers, apply for residency, build new lives in Britain, because going back to Germany means going back to nothing. Margaret is scheduled for repatriation in March 1947. 2 weeks before she's due to leave, Corporal Davies asks to speak with her, privately, in the camp office. She goes, her heart hammering, not from fear, from something else entirely. Davies looks nervous, actually nervous. I wanted to, that is, I've been thinking. He stops, starts again. When you return to Germany, you'll need. He trails off, frustrated with his limited German. Switches to English, speaking slowly so she can follow. You'll need help. Rebuilding. Starting over. And I thought, if you were willing, I could write to you. Send parcels, food, supplies, things that are scarce in Germany. Margaret stares at him. Why would you do that? Davies meets her eyes. Because I'd like to. Because you deserve better than what you're going back to. Because. He hesitates, then says quietly, because I care what happens to you. There it is, spoken aloud, the thing that's been growing between them for months, unacknowledged, inappropriate, real. I can't accept that, Margaret says, but her voice shakes. Why not? Because I was your enemy. Because accepting help from you feels like, I don't know what it feels like, betrayal, or surrender, or ... quote, or gratitude, Davies suggests gently, or friendship, or just human beings helping each other because the war is over and there's no point in holding grudges. Margaret closes her eyes. If the propaganda lied about British soldiers, about you, then what does that make me? Someone who served the wrong side? Someone who believed lies? Someone who survived, Davies says. That's all. Someone who survived and who's trying to move forward. Same as everyone. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out a small card with an address written on it. This is my sister's house in Liverpool. Write to me there if you want. No obligation. Just if you need help, or if you just want someone to write to. I'd like that. He sets the card on the desk between them. Doesn't push it toward her. Just leaves it there as an offer. A possibility. Margaret looks at the card for a long moment. Then she picks it up, slips it into her pocket. Thank you, she says quietly. Davies smiles. That same kind smile that's been undoing her defenses for months. You're welcome. Margaret returns to Germany in March 1947. Berlin is worse than she imagined. The city is a graveyard of buildings. Her mother is alive, thin, exhausted, but alive, and they have each other. Life in occupied Germany is hard. Food is scarce. Work is scarce. The future is uncertain. 3 weeks after she arrives, a parcel comes. British postmark. Inside, tinned food, tea, soap, chocolate, and a letter from Corporal Davies. Now just Tom Davies, civilian. Discharged from service. Back in Liverpool. Working in his father's shop. He writes about ordinary things. The weather. His children learning to ride bicycles. His wife asking after that German girl you mentioned. He doesn't mention the war. Doesn't mention captivity. Just writes like one person writing to another person. Like friendship is possible across all the divisions of recent history. Margaret writes back. She tells him about Berlin, about helping rebuild, about teaching English to children, using the skills Robert taught her in those Sussex fields. She doesn't mention the crush, the attraction, the feeling that still surfaces sometimes when she remembers dancing badly to Glenn Miller in that decorated mess hall. Instead, she writes, "Thank you for showing me that propaganda lies, that enemies can be human, that restraint is stronger than revenge." The correspondence continues for years. Tom sends parcels. Margaret writes letters. It's friendship, just friendship. Appropriate friendship between two people who once occupied opposite sides of a war and who now occupy the same side of peace. But sometimes, late at night, when Berlin is quiet and the ruins are softened by darkness, Margaret allows herself to remember. The way Tom's eyes crinkled when he smiled. The careful courtesy with which he treated her. The moment during that dance when she forgot she was a prisoner and just felt human. And she thinks, the propaganda lied about British soldiers, about the enemy, about what would happen to German women who fell into Allied hands. They promised brutality. They delivered humanity. They promised monsters. They delivered men who chose restraint over revenge. And sometimes, just sometimes, they delivered men with kind eyes who made you feel seen, who made you feel human, who made you realize that attraction doesn't ask permission from politics or history or the careful categories of friend and enemy. It just happens, despite everything, because of everything, because the opposite of war isn't peace. The opposite of war is recognizing the humanity of the person standing across from you. Even when that person is supposed to be your captor. Even when that person is supposed to be your enemy. Even when allowing yourself to see their humanity means questioning everything you were told to believe. Decades later, in the 1980s, Margaret returns to Britain. Tom Davies is dead by then. Heart attack in 1972. But his children meet her in Liverpool, show her photographs, share stories about their father who spoke fondly of that German girl who survived the war. They take her to Sussex, to the Harrison farm. It's changed hands. The Harrisons are long gone, but the barn is still there, the fields where she worked, the kitchen where Mrs. Harrison served tea in chipped cups. Margaret stands in that barn and remembers, the rain drumming on the roof, the careful courtesy of people who had every reason to be cruel and chose kindness instead, the young British farmhand teaching her English, the dance in the decorated mess hall, Corporal Davies' Tom, asking if he could write to her. And she thinks, I was so wrong. About everything. About the enemy. About British soldiers. About what capture would mean. The propaganda promised horror. Instead, I found humanity. And sometimes, just sometimes, I found attraction. The kind that couldn't be acted upon. The kind that existed in glances and small kindnesses and that one dance to Glenn Miller. The kind that taught me that hearts don't care about politics, don't care about recent history, don't care about the careful divisions between prisoner and guard, enemy and ally, German and British. Hearts just feel what they feel. And sometimes that's inconvenient. And sometimes that's inappropriate. And sometimes that's the most human thing possible. Before she leaves the farm, Margaret picks up a smooth stone from the farmyard, slips it into her pocket. It's not a grand gesture, not a profound symbol, just a reminder that the enemy turned out to be human, that restraint is stronger than revenge, that sometimes, in the middle of darkness, you find light in the most unexpected places, even in the kind eyes of a British corporal who showed you more humanity than your own government ever did. This is the kind of story that deserves to be remembered. If it moved you, if it made you think, please hit subscribe. History isn't just about battles and politics. It's about the moments when people chose to be better than they had to be. The British could have brutalized their German prisoners. They had the power. They had the justification. But they built barracks instead of pens. They issued rations instead of starvation. They chose order over chaos. They chose humanity over revenge. And in doing so, they won something far more important than territory. They won the right to look themselves in the mirror and see civilization looking back. True strength is restraint. And sometimes, just sometimes, restraint creates space for unexpected human connections, for friendship across enemy lines, for attraction that couldn't be acted upon, but was real nonetheless, for the recognition that propaganda lies, but humanity persists, even in captivity, even across the divide of recent war, even in the heart of a German prisoner who looked at her British captor and thought, against all propaganda, against all expectations, he has kind eyes. And that changed everything.